want to talk to you about human resources and what would have happened if Guy Fawkes was employed in 2020. Now, I absolutely appreciate that I'm the tea time slot, so I'm going to try and make human resources, or personnel as it's sometimes called, a little bit more interesting. So first of all, she says, desperately trying to get it to move on, let's remind ourselves about Guy Fawkes. So we all know the story. He was born in 1570 in York. He fought for Catholic Spain against the Dutch Republic and sought Spanish support for a Catholic rebellion in England. And he allied with Robert Catesby and a number of other co-conspirators, a lot of whom came from Dudley, which I didn't know till I was looking this up, to replace the Protestant King James with his daughter, Princess Elizabeth. So far, so good. But what if all of this had happened in 2020? What would we have done if Guy Fawkes was actually employed by Buckingham Palace and he had a bit of a problem? What would we have done? So this is where HR comes in, because the first thing is that Guy Fawkes and his fellow conspirators were aggrieved. They had a grievance. They believed that they were being discriminated against on the grounds of religion. So at the time in 1640, you couldn't be promoted, you couldn't even be appointed to state office if you were a Catholic. So he was being discriminated against on the grounds of religion. So the first thing that a HR person would do is say, well, did you ever actually raise this informally? So did he have a conversation with the king or anybody who was representing the king to say how upset they were, that this wasn't fair, and could they look into it? And of course, if they had raised it informally and things weren't done, they could have gone and raised it formally. They could have written to the king and said, we're not happy about this, we think we're being discriminated against, and could you please do something about it? And of course, if they had raised it formally, and it was 2020, the king would have been obliged to look at it properly and come back with a response. Now, if all of that failed, they could have done what's known as whistleblowing. Now, this is an act that is brilliantly called the Public Interest Disclosure Policy, but actually we better know it as whistleblowing. And that's where someone says, I'm very concerned about the actions of this company and I want to tell someone in confidence about it because I think I might be adversely affected. So we've seen a lot of that over the last few years, and people are actually protected by law if they want to whistleblow, if they want to say there's wrongdoing. So HR, human resources, and my job would be to make sure that employers deal with employees' concerns. If people feel that they are being dealt with badly, then my job is to go and support employers to make sure that they do address people's concerns. So let's say, for argument's sake, the king didn't do any of that, and we know he didn't. So what happens then? Well, the next thing was that there was a problem here with the Working Time Directive. So you'll all remember that Guy Fawkes was kept down in the Undercroft, sometimes known as the cold, dark, dank cellar, underneath Parliament building for at least 2 days. Now, the law says you can't work more than 48 hours in a working week unless you opt out. And there's some good reasons why people might opt out. Junior doctors is a very good example of that. But employers can't expect people to work more than 48 hours per week. They do have to actually seek their permission. And some of my clients have their staff available to work, not necessarily working all the time, but available to work for up to 50 hours a week because they might be on call, working on farms and so on. So did the king ask Guy Fawkes, did any of the conspirators ask Guy Fawkes to opt out? I think we all know the answer to that one. But secondly, I think his mental health must have been suffering. I'm a little bit worried about it was just Guy Fawkes that was in this Undercroft. Where were all the other conspirators? Was he bullied into being the one that was supposed to light the match and blow the place up? So as a HR professional, I'm a little bit worried about the team dynamics between the conspirators. How exactly did they decide the poor old Guy Fawkes was going to be the one that would take the rap if he was caught? So my job here would be to help employers support staff mental health and well-being. Now, clearly there was something wrong here. If Guy Fawkes and the conspirators thought the only way that they could deal with the problems was to blow up Parliament, straight away that would make me think there was a bit of a mental health and well-being problem here. So my job would be to go and talk to the employer and support them to be able to support the member of staff. So again, none of that was happened. So let's see what happens next. So there should have been an investigation and disciplinary. So he was caught under the Undercroft, as we know, and dragged off, and he wasn't actually notified of any of the allegations in writing. And this picture here on the left is quite important because it is supposed to be his signed confession. Now, you might not know that most reasonable employers probably wouldn't torture someone in order to get a signed confession. There should have been a reasonable investigation, but instead what happened was Guy Fawkes and one of his co-conspirators were put into a dungeon, and in the dungeon next to them was a royal spy who was listening to their conversations. So that was clearly entrapment, and no employment tribunal, no court would ever take entrapment or information obtained under duress. And also, it was a private conversation that the royal spy overheard, and that would now be protected by law. And finally, of course, he wasn't given any right of appeal, and that would be a breach of the law. So my job here would be to ensure that an employer follows what's known as a fair process and keeps to the law. So there should have been an investigation. He should have been told what his allegations were. He should have been given the right to be accompanied, and he should have been given an appeal. Now, the interesting thing here is if this case went to tribunal now, because the king didn't follow any of these things, didn't give him a fair process, the court would automatically increase any award by a minimum of 25%. So if the court did find in Guy Fawkes's favour, then he would have got an award plus 25%. So that would be quite costly for an employer. So you can see why HR makes you follow a fair process. So, of course, none of that happened, and then we got to the disciplinary sanction. Now, this is where it all went downhill, because there was a major health and safety breach. Because Guy Fawkes, and let's face it, he must be the most unlucky of employees when we get to this point, because not only did he slip on his way up the scaffold when he was going to be hanged, but he slipped and broke his neck. So he didn't actually get hanged. It was his dead body was hanged. He slipped and broke his neck. So big issue here with health and safety. And clearly anybody looking at this photograph here would realize there were no health and safety notices. There was no accident book. There was no investigation done. All of these serious breaches of health and safety law. So that could have left the king and the council, who were responsible for carrying out this hanging, which in this case was Westminster Council, could have left them open to criminal prosecution. And of course, civil law comes in here as well, because poor Guy Fawkes's family could have sued the king and the council because a member of their family, their main breadwinner, died in a workplace accident. So HR's responsibility here is we sometimes get involved with health and safety, not always, but in this particular case, we absolutely would have, because there wouldn't have been a fair process. So the moral of our HR story is HR is there to support employers, to ensure we follow a fair process, and to keep within employment law. So that's not all of what I do, and you can see a little bit about me here. A lot of the time we just come in and do policies and procedures, and if any of you have got a part-time job or a Saturday job or anything like that, you'll have a contract or a written statement of terms and conditions that tells you when you should work, how many hours you should work, whether you're entitled to sick leave, how much you get paid, what your holidays are, all those kind of things. And chances are somebody from HR has actually put that together for you. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through HR. So I know that people will post questions in Q&A when they will be picked up afterwards. But if there are any comments, I'd be delighted to hear. And it's back to you, Oliver.